So dear community, it's so wonderful to be together with everybody again this evening. How's everybody doing? Wonderful. I'm seeing so many smiling faces. Why don't we find ourselves in a comfortable position, just relaxing our bodies, coming to an uprightness, inviting ourselves, body and mind, to arrive to this moment, to this place. And we'll enjoy a sound of the bell and perhaps a few minutes of guided sitting meditation. As I breathe in, I'm aware of my in-breath just as it is. As I breathe out, I bring my awareness to my out-breath just as it is. This is my in-breath. This is my out-breath. Resting my attention with my breath, I become aware of my entire body. And as I'm aware of my entire body, I invite a sense of ease and openness to my body. Aware of the whole body of my breathing, experiencing the ease that is manifesting in my whole body, I breathe out. establishing myself firmly in presence and awareness of my body, I also bring awareness to the conditions of happiness that are available for me right here and right now. And as I breathe out, I release all of my worries, my expectations, and my anxieties. Breathing in, aware of conditions of happiness. Breathing out, releasing all of my worries, anxieties, and expectations. As I breathe in, I bring my attention to this place, the place that I'm sitting at this moment in time, to be undivided, to be fully present. And as I breathe out, I bring awareness to this moment. Breathing in right here, breathing out right now. So dear beloved community, welcome to this moment wherever we might be, a little bit all over the world. It's so wonderful to be together, and I'd like to welcome you also to Mountain Spring Monastery here in Australia. Some of us may not have had the chance to visit Australia in our physical bodies, but you are here in Australia right now with the Compassionate Ocean Sangha, and we're so delighted to have everybody here. In the monastic tradition, we have an annual 3-month retreat that in Vietnamese is called An Cư. It means peacefully dwelling. And I've been thinking a lot about this retreat the last few weeks as we've been in isolation. When we think of the rains retreat, particularly the monastics 3-month rains retreat, often we think only of the physical boundaries of remaining in the monastery, and we think of the opening ceremonies in terms of declaring the boundaries. And I've shared a little bit about this in past weeks, how in our monastic tradition, we actually see the external boundaries as invitations for us to learn how to focus our attention on what's important and what's nourishing, and that we actually take time to bless the boundaries of our dwelling. And for those of us under lockdown at this moment in time, I recommended that we see our physical boundaries rather than obstacles and challenges, to see them as blessings, as invitations, and to actually physically go around and to choose to dwell in that place, to see it as an act of love for ourselves and for others. But the other aspect of the rains retreat, the annual 3-month retreat that's been on my mind these last few days, is the fact that the ceremony of beginning the rains retreat doesn't begin with just a declaration of boundaries and things, but it also begins with taking refuge in each other. That we come together as a community, and there are much quicker ways to count how many people are going to be participating in a 3-month retreat than the formal traditional way we do it. But we come together, and then each of us has to physically receive a stick from another person, and then we have to pass that stick back to a third brother or sister who will come and collect the sticks. Then they'll go down to the end of the hall, and they will announce how many fully ordained monastics, how many novices, how many lay practitioners, and so on will be present within the boundaries for this 3-month retreat. And then after that, that declaration is taken, we come and we bow before each other. The people, those of us who will be there for 90 days, we bow before each other, and we ask to take refuge in each other for those 90 days. We actually take a form of dependence on each other, and we ask the people who we're going to be dwelling with for those 90 days to be our support, to be our place of refuge. And I've been thinking about this a lot, because for many of us it can be challenging to be together with our families, or some of us are living with roommates or friends. And believe it or not, we monastics have quite a lot of experience about dwelling in confinement for extended periods of time. Little things can easily become big issues. And what I found helpful is to actually, that act of actually taking refuge in the others that dwell in the space, seeing them as practice partners, seeing them as my concrete supports for practice and growth, has been very helpful for me. So that rather than focusing on the little irritations, I actually focus on the areas of support, the elements of support that they give me. And in this moment in time, it can be really important to reach out and to connect and feel connected as well. One of the greatest teachers of our lineage spoke about the fact that the real spiritual practitioner is someone who has nothing to do anymore, is not busy anymore. And so many of us in our usual lives are very busy. We're very occupied. And we've been wishing for some time and some space to be able to step away from our everyday lives and to experience things anew. Well, that time has come. And yet what I'm hearing from my friends as I'm going around is that that busyness, that over occupation with different activities has carried into our lockdown. It's become our experience even at home. We're going from one thing to another, and we're feeling agitated and burned out and isolated. Um, and so it seems to me to be an important moment to consider how we use our time, how we nourish ourselves. And one of the most important essays that I've read on this tendency over the past few years is an essay by an essayist, a philosopher called Alain de Botton. And he wrote an essay called On Distraction. And I invite you to look it up and read it in its entirety, should you be so inclined. But it really speaks to this tendency of our human mind. He says that one of the more embarrassing and self-indulgent challenges of our time is the task of relearning how to concentrate. The past decade has seen an unparalleled assault on our capacity to fix our minds steadily on anything. To sit still and to think without succumbing to an anxious reach for a machine has become almost impossible. Now, just between you and me, I also realize the irony of sharing about being overly attached to technology while giving a talk through technology. I'm aware of that irony. To sit still and think without succumbing to an anxious reach for a machine has become almost impossible. The obsession with current events is relentless. We're made to feel that at any point, somewhere on the globe, something may occur to sweep away old certainties. Something that if we failed to learn about it instantaneously, could leave us wholly unable to comprehend ourselves or others. We're continuously challenged to discover new works of culture. And in the process, we don't allow any one of them to assume any weight or significance in our mind. We leave a movie vowing to reconsider our lives in the light of that film's values. Yet by the following evening, our experience is well on the way to disillusion. The need to diet, which we know so well in relation to food and which runs so contrary to our natural impulses, should be brought to bear on what we now have to relearn in relation to knowledge, people, and ideas. Our minds, no less than our bodies, require periods of fasting. This is, I feel, one of the most crucial things for us to look at over the next week or so as we continue on with our period of lockdown. If we learn how to, as takeholders, have a diet for ourselves in terms of the things that we consume, the choices we make, the things we decide to do, then the time that we have becomes some of the most precious and nourishing time of our life. And it doesn't mean doing nothing, but it means engaging with the everyday tasks of our life as a spiritual practice, as a practice of awakening. Some people think that we monastics in the monastery just sit around all day and do nothing. Well, we do sit a lot and we drink tea a lot and we smile a lot and we laugh a lot, but we also have a lot of work to do. Here in Mountain Spring, there are many days that we work for probably about 4 to 6 hours, quite physical work. out cutting the grass or trimming back raspberry bushes or preparing administrative things or writing emails, all these kind of things that we do, giving consultations through Zoom and so on, meditation instruction. So the question for us is not a matter of having something to do or nothing to do. The question is how we approach it and making wise choices. For example, do we take time each day to have space outside of space and time outside of time, in addition to doing the daily tasks of our life in a relaxed way, in a loving way, in a way that is nourishing? Do we also find time where we put aside all of the busyness, put aside the conversations, come back to our bodies, turn off our mobile phone or whatever, or the television if we have a television, turn it off even for half an hour or an hour, and to do some total relaxation in the middle of the day or at some point that makes sense for us? That's incredibly powerful, just those moments of rest, because while there's a few weeks in the beginning when we're in a new situation where everything's new and everything seems wonderful and marvelous, but then the old habit energies start to come back. And this is where having some loving discipline, having some loving awareness, and really knowing what we need to do to nourish ourselves is incredibly important. So last week, at the end of the talk, I offered 2 suggestions, and I just wanted to check in, and I was wondering how everyone was doing about those. I suggested that through this week, we would practice mindfulness of our sense doors, being aware of our sensory input, the things we hear, the things we see, the things we smell and taste and experience through our body, and also the things that we think, as well as our reactions, what was coming up. This is really one of the aspects of a diet, like being aware of the input that we receive through our senses. And I shared, like in terms of the spiritual practice, that if we're experiencing a lot of overwhelm, if we're experiencing a sense of almost feeling like we have no skin, that becoming aware of the input that we're constantly in contact with each and every moment is really important. And then the reflection question that I had for everybody was, what for you is the difference between aspiration and craving? And I'm hoping to hear at some point how people's experience of both the practice of becoming aware and directing loving attention to the input through our sense doors was for you, and also the reflection question. When you consider your aspiration, what brought you to practice? What's the difference between aspiration and that thirst, that craving that sometimes we experience? Through these series of talks, we're focusing on the 7 factors of awakening. We began a few weeks ago with that metaphor that we know so well in the Buddhist tradition of the metaphorical shore of suffering and the shore of awakening. And then we delved into looking at, on a personal level, when we talk about suffering, what's our own personal suffering? How does suffering manifest for us? Really having that understanding of that constellation of suffering within ourselves. As individuals, as families, as a community, and as a nation, it's important to look at that. And then also asking ourselves, what is it that I myself need to wake up to? And we recognize that it's quite easy to know what or at least think what other people need to wake up to. But we have a lot of responses if we wanted to offer suggestions to our loved one or our family or our friends what they need to wake up to. But we decided to look at the question ourselves, what is that call, that longing of our heart? What is it that we need to wake up to? What at this moment in time is the shore of awakening for us? And then as we considered that, we also felt that it was important to look and to see, what did the Buddha say awakening consisted of? And the Buddha shared that awakening consists of these 7 factors that we're going through over the next few weeks. That awakening consists of these qualities, these 7 factors or 7 limbs of this body of awakening. That they're both a fruit and an every moment path. That if we see these factors of awakening manifesting in our lives, even in a small way, then we can have confidence that we're on the right path. As we say in our tradition, happiness is knowing that we're on the right path, and we know we're on the right path if we are experiencing some transformation. We're noticing that we feel a little less angry, a little less anxious. From time to time, we might even have a sense of happiness, and that we notice these things weren't present for us before. Happiness is knowing that we're on the right path. So last week, we spoke about the first 2 factors of awakening, the first 2 of these qualities that are both an every moment practice to cultivate, an every moment quality to cultivate, and also a fruit. And the first factor was mindfulness, and the second was investigation, the sense of curiosity, the sense of looking a little bit more deeply into something. And then tonight we're going to be speaking about the next factor of awakening, which is energy. In Pali, it's vidya. And so I'd like to share where in Buddhism energy comes from. It doesn't come in the Buddhist view only from energy supplements or energy drinks or foods or vitamin pills, or a lot of exercise, these kind of things. But it comes from engaging mindfulness and that sense of curiosity that's called investigation of dharmas, which means investigating, looking deeply into everything, really actively engaging with something, whether it's a meditation object or whether it's an idea that we have, or just looking a little bit below the surface, as well as this sense of self-confidence that we've been speaking about as well, this sense of confidence that we're on the right path. Meditation is an active process. I've shared with my friends that I really don't like the English word meditation because it can have a passive sense, whereas the original Pali word that we translate as meditation, bhavana, means mental development or mental cultivation. That there's not a passive sense there, but a real active engagement with our spiritual practice. When we have right mindfulness, this sense of moving forward, this exploration, this curiosity, this discovery always manifests. And when we have that curiosity, then we have more energy arising. It just becomes so interesting. Everything becomes so interesting. We begin noticing things that we haven't noticed before. In fact, what we're calling energy here, the original Pali word is vidya. Vidya can be translated as energy, but it can also be translated as persistence or effort, that those things go together. I remember when I was first beginning to practice Buddhism and practice meditation, I was in Sri Lanka and I was receiving teachings at that time. And the monk who was teaching me meditation talked about putting forth effort, and then energy would develop. And I said, don't you mean, Bhante, don't you mean, brother, that you have energy and then you put forth effort? And he said, no, it's the other way around. They go together. And I found that it was such a different way of looking. I was growing up here, and I always had the idea that when you have energy, enough energy, you put forth some effort. But in the way of looking of the Buddha, energy and effort, they're one, that they go together. And they're tied in very deeply with this sense of curiosity. So in a sense, this effort, and effort here doesn't mean pushing ourselves to the limit. It means, in a simple way, always showing up at our edge, of not getting complacent or comfortable and thinking that we've understood everything already, that that's all there is to know, and settling into a sense of dullness. But actually always stepping forward into engagement, always asking ourselves, am I sure that I really understand this fully? Am I sure that I'm really engaging? What's the little point of discomfort for me in this moment? Meditation's on a deeper level, not just about getting comfortable, but it's about awakening to what is. It's about waking up to reality in each and every moment, not at some imaginary moment 20 years or 20 lifetimes in the future, but right here and right now. So always working our edge. So this is quite different from our usual way of looking. And if we are a long-term practitioner, I think it's important to ask ourselves, am I really showing up at the edge? Where's the place of growth for me in my spiritual practice, in my meditation practice? Lately, for our friends who've been joining these talks, you've noticed that I've been quoting a lot from the Anguttara Nikaya, and tonight is no exception. When we look at this factor of awakening, this quality of the shore of awakening for us to cultivate in every moment, there's a nice text in the Anguttara Nikaya called the Anga Sutta. It's in the Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 5. And the Buddha describes 5 factors for energy and effort. He says there's the case where a practitioner has confidence in their path and has confidence that awakening is possible. Not only that the Buddha awakened 2,600 years ago, but that it is possible for you, for each one of us, in each and every moment to wake up. The second is that they're free from too heavy an illness or too heavy a pain, discomfort, and that they have good digestion, not too hot, not too cold, and of moderate strength. So basically, it means that we're not too physically challenged. And we've all been in those moments when it is we're very ill or we don't have enough physical conditions to put things forward. So this is the one aspect of the arising of energy and effort. The third is that they're not fraudulent or deceitful. That it's said that we are able to declare ourselves openly and wholeheartedly to our teacher or to wise friends in our spiritual life, sharing what's actually true for us and not what we think they want to hear. So that is another quality for the arising of energy. Then the next is that we keep our energy and our effort focused on letting go of unskillful mental qualities and for cultivating skillful mental qualities. And we'll speak a little bit about this in a moment. That in order to generate this sense of energy, that we're steadfast and we're solid in our effort and always cultivating these skillful mental qualities. And that finally, the final factor for the arising of this quality of energy is that we're discerning. We're endowed with discernment leading to the arising of our goal. And so here, this is a track back to what we spoke about last week. It means understanding what called us forth in our life to our spiritual path. What is the search that we have embarked on as an individual that is manifesting in our spiritual life? And what's the shore of awakening for us? And if we know what we really want to manifest in our life, making choices that are in line with that and not getting distracted. That's another source of energy. In Buddhism, somebody's not called noble because of their birth, but we're called noble when our body, our speech, and our mind are one. So here in this final quality, there's a sense of being united, of not being divided anymore, and that being a great source of energy. When we speak of intention or right intention, which is really the second factor of the Noble Eightfold Path, I often think back to or reflect back to the fact that the Buddha himself, sat in his immovable spot under the Bodhi tree. When he embarked on his search, he sat down and he chose to remain there. It didn't matter what happened, he remained committed to the direction that he was wanting to move in. And while that was the case for the Buddha, it's not that possible for most of us to find a place to sit down and to enter into deep concentration for many weeks at a time. But the invitation here, I feel on a deeper level, is for each one of us to find our own immovable spot, the place that we rest our heart and our intention upon, and to rest under our own tree of awakening, to find that spot and to put down the tap roots into our own experience, to not get swayed here, there, and everywhere, but by putting down those roots into our lived experience, letting insight bloom. And so it's important to have that sense of reflectiveness about our own experience, to have a sense of looking back and considering what we're doing and whether what we're doing is in line with our aspiration, what we most want to manifest. The Buddha said to one of the young novices, "What do you think a mirror is for?" And the novice said, "Well, it's for reflection. It reflects back what's there." And the Buddha said, in the same way, bodily acts, verbal acts, and mental acts, we should do with repeated reflection. And as practitioners, we're invited to reflect before we do something physically or mentally or verbally, during and after these things. Like, will this action bring benefit to my body and mind and to the body and mind of others? This again is a reminder on many levels, but particularly of the talk that we gave a few weeks ago about the importance in Buddhism of reaching out and connecting with community, of seeing how our actions and interactions affect others. That spiritual practice is really not about the Holy Trinity of I, me, and my, but actually it's about how we relate with the world around. So in this little quote from the Buddha's teachings, we're reminded of community once again. Why don't we enjoy a sound of the bell? Buddhism has a lot of lists, and there's 5 of something, there's 14 of something else, there's 348 of another thing, and it can be quite overwhelming for a number of us when we consider all the different lists of things in Buddhism, we wonder where to begin. But the interesting thing is that Buddhism keeps coming back to the same points over and over again, just sharing these key points in different ways, with different emphases at different moments. So if you have your antenna out, if you're really aware, you'll realize that in fact, when we're talking about effort here, that effort is also one of the qualities of what we call the Noble Eightfold Path, right effort. And when we're talking about energy and effort and persistence, then in Buddhism, right effort consists of 4 things. They're called the 4 right efforts, or sometimes the 4 diligences, but I like right effort, so that's what I'll use. The first is that if there's an already arisen mental formation that is beneficial, that you find nurturing and in line with your aspiration, again, the importance of knowing what we want to manifest in our life, then the first of the 4 right efforts is doing everything in your power to keep it alive, to keep it going. Tay often shared with us that it's a lot like having somebody visit your home. If you have somebody coming to visit, that's really not happening right now during the lockout, but let us, just for the sake of our discussion, if we had a person visiting, and I imagine after the lockdown, it'll be a delight to have people come over. If you have a person come to visit you that you find is absolutely delightful, this brings a sense of happiness, that brings a sense of ease, that brings a sense of joy and nourishment, then it would be the most natural thing in the world to want to keep that person for as long as possible. To really, feel the absence, their absence when they're not there. And so in the same way, we're invited to bring that same quality of attention to our mind. And if we notice that we're experiencing a mind state that has those qualities, and it's in line with our aspiration, to notice, perhaps, to become sensitive to what stimulated. What did I come into contact with that nurtured that, that gave rise to that wonderful quality? Did I read something? Was it a piece of music? Was it a beautiful fragrance that I came into contact with? Was it a piece of like some food, a taste that I had? What nurtured it? And to become aware of the kind of sensory input that nurture those wholesome qualities, and then noticing what maintains that sense within us and doing everything in our power to keep it going. That's the first of the 4 right efforts. The second of the 4 right efforts is consciously watering not yet arisen wholesome seeds. So it means, again, becoming cognizant of the role of sensory input and beginning to notice the things that we come into contact with in our daily life that nurture wholesome qualities. Maybe we might not be experiencing that quality right now, but we know that doing that certain thing, whether it's exercise or going for a walk or having a conversation on a certain topic, listening to a beautiful piece of music, nurtures a good quality, like a wholesome quality in us. Then we do everything in our power to nurture that quality that hasn't yet arisen, to create conditions for it to arise. That's the second of the 4 right efforts. The third of the 4 right efforts is if an already arisen mental formation, like if we're experiencing something in our mind as a feeling or an emotion or a mind frame, and it's not in line with our aspiration, if it's unhelpful, if we feel like it's unwholesome, maybe to use some general examples, perhaps we're feeling angry, perhaps we're feeling depressed, and so on, anxious, then we again engage in a similar practice to the first of the 4 right efforts and begin looking at when did I begin to notice this? What was I in contact with? what sensory inputs was I in contact with. And we may have an insight right then and there, but it might take us a little while of becoming more and more sensitive to sensory input to become aware of what actually stimulated it. But over time, we will become aware of what stimulated it. And then we consciously choose not to nurture it any longer. If we have an unwelcome guest, then we may not offer them a third cup of tea, kind of energy, just two. Of course, we don't want to become neurotic about these things. Please understand that. Please notice that I'm not saying positive or negative, because in the Pali language, when we're talking about these qualities, we don't actually say positive or negative. The word that we translate often as positive is kusala. It means skillful. And then the word that we translate often as negative is akusala, and it means not yet skillful. So I find that a very helpful way to relate to this inner landscape. And we need to look at these seeds in terms of skillful energies and not yet skillful energies. Everything has something to teach us. And there's nothing that's inherently bad if we know how to take good care of it, as Tay has told us again and again. So we need to be careful not to become neurotic and just cut off parts of our experience and say that it's bad, I don't want to look at it. That wouldn't be very wise. So if an already arisen mental formation is not in line with our aspiration, if it's unhelpful, if we find it's unskillful, then we practice to stop nurturing it. And that can be challenging to do sometimes, actually. I had a friend, this is back in 1998. She was in the children's program with me when I was much younger. I was asked to help with the children's program in Upper Hamlet in Plum Village. And we staff were sitting together and sharing. And she said, sometimes I feel a little bit depressed and I put on a black coat and then I put on my black sunglasses and a black hat and I go and I feel like I want to sit in the back of a dark cafe and drink espresso all day while writing poetry. This kind of vibe. And she said, I do it. I sit there for 3, 4, 5 hours. I don't feel any better, but it's just, it's something that I've got to do, kind of thing. And so sometimes we get into that kind of mindset. We know it's not necessarily helpful. It's not necessarily something that's going to change the peg. And it can be, but it can be quite hard to change those habit energies. And that's why when we're not experiencing an unhelpful mind state, it can be helpful in those moments to actually come up with some strategies and put them in place for when we're experiencing some unhelpful mind state. Perhaps putting some reminders, around the house or things like that can be helpful. And then the fourth of the 4 right efforts is not watering unhelpful seeds. Again, becoming aware of the kinds of sensory input that nurture unhelpful mental formations or unhelpful emotions, and then not, in the initial stages of our practice, not watering them consciously. Later on, when we have more awareness and more capacity to be able to embrace and not be swept away by emotions, becoming attentive to these things and looking into them as they arise and as they're nurtured can be a good practice. But in the beginning and intermediate stages, an environment is really important, and conscious watering is really important. In terms of these factors of awakening and the kinds of attention that we have and how to apply them, the Buddha said that we need to practice as if we're fine-tuning a musical instrument. And when the Buddha, there's a beautiful story in the text about a monk called Venerable Sona, and he was meditating in seclusion by himself. He was a very dedicated meditator, and it says that he was doing walking meditation until the skin of the soles of his feet was split and bleeding. And this train of thought arose in his awareness of the Buddha's disciples who have aroused their right efforts, their energy. I am one. I'm that kind of person, but I see that I'm still stuck in some way. Perhaps it looks like there's no hope for me anymore. Maybe I should just forget about my spiritual practice and give up my monastic life and go back home. And so he went and but he thought before I just give it all up, maybe I'll go and I'll talk to the Buddha. So he had a chance for an audience with the Buddha, and the Buddha listened to his story and said to him, just as you were meditating before, and didn't you have the idea that of the Buddha, of my disciples, you're one who has right effort and right energy, but you're still stuck in some way, and you were thinking about returning to the householder life. Is that right? And Sona said, yes, that's correct. And the Buddha said, well, I know you, Sona. Before you became a monk, you used to play the vina, which is like a stringed instrument, didn't you? And he said, yes, I did. And the Buddha said, well, what do you think? When the strings of your instrument were too tight, were you able to play it? And he said, no, the sound wasn't good, Buddha, it wasn't good. And then the Buddha said, well, how about when the strings were very loose? How was the sound then? And he said, the sound was also not good, Buddha. And then the Buddha said, well, what do you think when the strings of your instrument were neither too tight or too loose, but tuned properly to be right on pitch? What was the sound like then? And Sona said, it was good. And the Buddha said, in the same way, if you have too much effort, you will have restlessness and worry. If you're too tight, you will end up with an agitated mind. But if you're too slack, then you'll be lazy. So you should determine the right pitch for your effort and attune the pitch of your faculties to that, and then pick up your theme. And Venerable Sona said, yes, I will do that. So, and it said in the sutra that after that, he determined the right pitch for his effort. He attuned the pitch of his faculties to that, and he picked up his theme. And dwelling alone, secluded, and mindful, he in no time attains his goal. So I love that phrasing. I really love it, to determine the right pitch for his effort. Maybe it's because I come from a musical background. I played the piano from when I was very young till when I was 16. I played for hours a day. And if you're a musician, then you become very attuned to pitch. You become very attuned to rhythms. You become very attuned to these kind of things. And I find that a very helpful image to adjust one's pitch, adjust up slightly, adjust down slightly, to whatever the circumstance is, and to know that in every circumstance, the kind of attuning that we need in every moment might be different. It's different from this moment to the next moment. We don't just, if you're a musician, you know that you don't just play the piece of music in exactly the same way every time you play it. Just like when we invite the bell, we don't invite the bell in exactly the same way every time. We need to be aware of how we're feeling, what kind of room we're in, how the people in the meditation hall are feeling, what kind of energy we want to bring. It's a different sound every time. If you are a musician, then if you can read music, you can read a piece of music, then you have a snapshot of what the composer had in mind when they wrote that piece of music. And if you can play that piece of music technically perfectly, exactly the same way every time, congratulations. Your career will last maybe 3 or 4 years. That's wonderful. And you'll be a great technical musician, but you won't go further. What needs to happen at some point is this internalization process, that piece of music enters you. you start to enter and understand what the composer was trying to convey. And then you bring a little bit of your own experience to that as well, how you're feeling in this moment, how this space is feeling, how big the hall is, understanding the energy of the audience, and then you make your interpretation. It's the same way in the life of the practice. In the beginning, it's important to imitate, to understand why things are the way they are. But also, there's this element of innovation, of also bringing our whole selves to the practice, of allowing the practice also to manifest through us. The second of the awakenings that I'm going to speak about today, the fourth factor of awakening is joy. In the Pali language, it's piti. With any real insight, joy will arise. A serious practitioner is not necessarily solemn, is not necessarily heavy. If we have an insight into the stories we tell ourselves, then it's impossible not to develop a sense of humor. It's really impossible. I thought that I might like to show you just a very short video of Tay. I showed it during the Wake Up retreat. So it's about 55 seconds long. We'll see how it goes. Let's see. So that one is worth watching over and over and over again. A serious practitioner is not necessarily a solemn practitioner. In fact, there's a saying in Chinese that if we become like there's a certain kind of practitioner that they lose all the joy of their practice, they lose all the juice of their practice, and they become dried up papaya. Is the phrase dried up in Australia, dried up pawpaws. So as one of the important qualities of awakening, these factors of awakening, there's an element of joy, an element of happiness. In Vietnamese, we say "tu hỷ sinh lạc." It means from joy, happiness is born. That joy gives rise to happiness. The practice of meditation, the spiritual life, should give rise to this bubbling up, this welling up of joy that's described in a beautiful way in the text. It's described as a person kneading water into flour, so that the water permeates through the flour. The water absolutely saturates the flour. In the same way, joy, this joy is meant to saturate every cell of our being. And another image in the text is a lake in which a cool spring comes welling up. And that coolness of the spring wells up and suffuses the entire lake. I've been thinking about this image quite a lot because here in Mountain Spring Monastery, we actually have a spring. The water wells up, this cold, very cold water wells up in the middle of one of the lakes here, and fills up the whole of the lake over. And this is exactly the image in the sutra, that this energy of joy will saturate our entire being. So this quality of joy, of happiness, is not a quality to be pushed aside, but a quality to actually be cultivated, to be nurtured, and it's one of the elements of awakening. When we talk about the Buddha, in Mahayana Buddhism, we speak of the three bodies of the Buddha. This is the three bodies of the Buddha, both outside and within. And the first is what we call a Nirmanakaya, which is the retribution body, basically the physical manifestation of a Buddha, or our physical manifestation, your physical manifestation. I like the fact that it's called a retribution body because sometimes, we can feel like, it's really a heavy retribution. Other times you can feel, it's a light retribution. But the literal term actually means retribution body. The second body that we all have, and especially a Buddha has, is called the Sambhogakaya, which is the bliss body. It literally means bliss body or enjoyment body. This body of enjoyment, of bliss. And this body of enjoyment, of taking delight in, of this welling up, this diffusion of joy, is what's being spoken about here. It's said, and Tay's always told us, that a Buddha has their personal and portable Pure Land, that wherever they go, they create a Pure Land around them. And as meditation or mindfulness practitioners, we bring that energy wherever we go. Some of us might also have our portable difficulties, our portable suffering realm that we bring around. But here, we're invited to cultivate this bliss body, this enjoyment body. And then the third body of the Buddha, or body that we can come into contact with, is called the Dharmakaya, the Dharma body, which is the embodiment of truth itself, or a transformation body. I will never forget, back in the year 2000, Tay flew over to the United States. Just for 4 days, he was asked to travel to the White House to give a teaching, a conference on AIDS. President Clinton was in the White House at that time, so it was quite a while ago. And Tay came back to Plum Village, and it was a day of mindfulness. Now, our teacher very rarely didn't give a Dharma talk. Like it almost never happened. I think this is the only time that I can remember our teacher not giving a Dharma talk. Even when, like on one of the final tours, teaching tours that he gave in Korea, we were at a temple where there were a number of thousands of people gathered, and Tay was so ill. This is before his stroke. He was so ill that day he could hardly move. And he said, you know what? He was just laying in bed in so much pain. And he said, you know what? Maybe I'll ask the ancestors to help me to sit up, and I'll just sit up. That's all I'll do. And so he sat up, and then he said, maybe the ancestors will help me to stand up. I'll stand up, and that's all I'll do. And then he stood up, and then maybe I'll just put on my robe, and I'll put on my, and he went through all of these things. And I'll never forget, we were sitting on the stage, where on the podium where Tay was going to give a talk. We were all the monastic community was there. And, we knew Tay was quite ill, and we're offering meditation, and one of our brothers was beginning to give a gentle talk. And then our teacher came out on the stage, and he was just going to sit there for a while, just to sit with the Sangha. But then he thought, maybe I can share a couple of words. And he gave the talk in that way. And like literally that moved me so deeply. Whenever I feel tired, feel exhausted, remembering my teacher and how he was in such a state. But from his love for everybody, literally just maybe I'll just sit up. Maybe I can put on my robe, and I can take a couple of steps over and sit with the Sangha. And then I can do that. And I think, who am I? Who am I to think that personally, oh, I'm too tired to, just maybe sit with everybody on Zoom for an hour or something like that. For me, it really puts it in perspective. The love of a teacher like that, it really entered me deeply. Just to see that. And Tay was somebody who really walked his talk. He didn't just give Dharma talks with the mouth, but he talked with his whole life. So anyway, he came back from the US in the year 2000, and it was really the only time he did give a talk, and he asked to put on a video talk. So Tay was sitting there inviting the bell for a video talk of himself giving a Dharma talk, and at the end of the talk, Tay said to us, the retribution body of Tay is watching the transformation body of Tay give a Dharma talk. So cultivating this enjoyment body, this bliss body, is a really important practice. What nurtures you? What brings you joy? It's not the usual kind of excitement energy, but a deep welling up that comes from the heart of our spiritual practice. And again, comes from that curiosity, that engagement. I will never forget when I was a young novice, sitting with my teacher on his deck. I was his attendant at the time. And I was very serious, like very proper. I was following all of the fine manners perfectly. And then when our teacher looked over at me, he was sitting in his hammock. He said, Brother Phap, if you're going to sit here, make sure you swing your legs. And so, of course, I swung my legs and everything at that moment in time. But I realized he was giving me a great gift then, an invitation of, understanding that we can't always choose our circumstances, but we can choose how to respond. So this fact of wherever we are, finding a way to swing our legs, that's a way to cultivate the bliss body, to cultivate this sense of joy. It might not be always what we expect, but in each and every moment, there are wonderful conditions of happiness. And so to end this sharing today, I just wanted to offer two, like a question and a practice for the week. The first is like for us to contemplate as we go through the week and we nurture, we become aware of these sensory inputs and what they nurture within us. What do you notice as some of the main tendencies, the main story threads of your mind, the main tracks that your mind gets on? Is it agitation? Is it worry about the future or regrets about the past or so forth? Is it, what are the main tracks of your mind, and how might you tune your practice in a way to address that? What are some of the elements to tune up or to tune down to be able to address that? And the second is, what aspects of meditation do you find joyful and nourishing? And which ones are challenging for you? And why do you think that might be? So those are the two questions that I want to offer you this week as reflection questions to give some kind of focus and definition for the week. I hope something has been helpful this evening. It's certainly been a delight to share with you. Why don't we have a sound of the bell, just coming back to our breathing to conclude this portion of our sharing.